Beyond the walls of Jerusalem lies a land steeped in history and rich in mystical association. Much of it is desert, a place of solitude for religious men to escape worldly distraction as they draw nearer to God. Ascetic discipline, if little else, seems ideally suited to this forbidding land. But some remarkable people do make their living here. The nomadic Bedouins survive in the wilderness by skills and customs long forgotten by the modern world. The dress of the Bedouin, their flocks and their tents appear as a reenactment of biblical times. In fact, the laws of their society don't differ much from the laws of Moses. And for modern Israelis, the Bedouin are a living reminder of the historic crossing of the desert on the exodus from Egypt. But the Bedouin are no descendants of the Israelites, for all their reverence of Moses. They're Muslims, whose forefathers were driven from the Arabian Peninsula many centuries ago. They used to be notorious brigands, raiding Jerusalem itself from their camps in the desert. While those days have gone, many of their ancient customs remain. Hospitality is still generous. Even passers-by are invited to take refreshment. Bedouin folklore abounds with stories of men who preferred to sacrifice their most prized possession rather than be thought mean. And there's been little change in attitudes to the division of labor. While the women are out working, the men sit around drinking tea. In this society, the men make the decisions and the women carry out their instructions. Just south of Jerusalem lies one of the chief centers of urban Arabs living under Israeli rule, the West Bank town of Bethlehem. Its links with the Holy City are profound. It was the birthplace of King David and his descendant, the Christian Messiah. The Byzantines made Bethlehem a place of Christian pilgrimage, and Crusader kings were crowned here during the time of the Latin Kingdom in the 12th century. But for all its Christian associations, Bethlehem is still very much a Muslim Arab town. Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, but grew up in Nazareth of Galilee. The modern town is dominated by the Basilica of the Annunciation, dedicated to the tradition that this was also the place where Mary received news of her miraculous pregnancy. In the time of Jesus, it was a Jewish town. These days, both Arabs and Jews have their own distinct quarters. For early Christian pilgrims, there were always plenty of the wondrous tales of the time concerning the boyhood of Jesus. In one Nazarene synagogue, there was supposed to be his old school bench. Christians could move it, but not Jews. Today's pilgrims are given a less chauvinistic tour of the town. The Gospels say Jesus came from Nazareth to the River Jordan to be baptized by John the Baptist. This is one of the traditional sites of the ceremony, and it's a popular place for Christian pilgrims like this group of Nigerians. Jews, as well as Christians, have good reason to revere the River Jordan. It must have been around here that Joshua led the children of Israel on their first foray into the Promised Land. Cana, just up the road from Nazareth, is another stop on the pilgrimage through the earthly ministry of Jesus. This was the scene of the first miracle, the saving of a wedding reception when the wine ran out. According to St. John's Gospel, Jesus had jars filled with water and taken to the master of ceremonies, who then congratulated the bridegroom on keeping the best wine till last. There were no miracles on the Mount of the Beatitudes overlooking the Sea of Galilee. This was where Jesus delivered his manifesto. Standing on the site of the present Franciscan church and convent, he spoke to the multitude of the blessings which would be visited upon the meek, the peacemakers, and on those persecuted in his name. There's also a tradition based on St. Luke that Jesus made the final selection of his 12 disciples on this spot. The Sea of Galilee had an important part in the preparations Jesus made for his ministry. Some of his closest associates came from men who were fishing these waters nearly 2,000 years ago. St. Matthew describes how Jesus was walking along the shore when he saw the brothers Simon, Peter, and Andrew hard at work. He called to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." One of the most popular species of fish from this lake is still named St. Peter in honor of the first disciple. The Sea of Galilee saw many examples of the practical nature of the Savior's miracles. The Church of the Multiplication marks the spot where Jesus is believed to have provided a picnic lunch for 5,000 people out of 5 loaves and 2 fish. The present building was erected over some ancient mosaics from a Byzantine church, which celebrates this remarkable feat of catering. It was fitting that such bounty should have been granted near the Sea of Galilee, for this great lake has always been a source of plenty in an arid land. Although over 200 meters below sea level, it's always been a reliable source of fresh water. It serves as a reservoir for many urban areas, including Jerusalem, and provides irrigated water to surrounding farmlands. To the Jews, it's Lake Kinneret, the name mentioned when God outlined the Promised Land to Moses. After the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, it became the center of Jewish life in Palestine. It remains to this day a place of great attraction. The historic waters of the Sea of Galilee are an important source of supply for the Israeli fishing industry. Fish caught here are destined for Jerusalem and other markets around the country. The men working this boat are Christian Arabs, spiritual descendants of those earlier fishermen who abandoned their nets to follow the Christian Messiah. These days, they manage without divine assistance of the sort the disciples received when Jesus came visiting after the resurrection. According to St. John, Peter and some of the others had resumed fishing after the execution of their leader. They'd had no luck at all until the risen Jesus appeared and advised casting their net on the right side of the boat. This they did, and caught so many fish that they couldn't haul the net out of the water. Land around the Sea of Galilee is particularly fertile. Josephus, the historian who witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, refers to its mild climate and the abundance of its plant life. Nothing, he says, seems to refuse to grow here. 2 millennia after Josephus, the district still flourishes as an important supplier of fresh produce. Here, Palestinian Arabs plant green peppers that will, in due season, find their way to a Jerusalem table. Galilee has been part of Israel since the War of 1948, but for many years life on its farms and settlements was threatened from the neighboring Golan Heights. That danger subsided after the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israeli forces took the heights from the Syrian army. But fighting broke out again in 1973, the year of the Yom Kippur War. The Syrians made desperate but unsuccessful attempts to drive the Israelis back to the plains below. Since that time, an uneasy peace has reigned on this border. To the south, the Allenby Bridge, named after the British general who drove the Turks from the Holy Land in 1918, links Israel with another hostile neighbor, Jordan. Officially, the countries are still at war, but this crossing of the River Jordan is remarkably free of the trappings of high security so evident on other sensitive borders. From Israel, busloads of technically enemy aliens make regular crossings. No Israeli citizen could make this trip, but Arabs from Jerusalem and the West Bank have free access. Many have friends, family, or business associations in Jordan, and they still retain Jordanian passports, despite residence in a country which has yet to achieve peace with Jordan. As they pass from Israeli control, they're required to produce their identity cards. The traffic from the Jordanian side includes parties of foreign tourists, one commodity that neither country can easily do without. But entry into Israel is the same for tourists as it is for everyone else. A very serious business. The Israelis have been surrounded by enemies for so long, and they've suffered terrorist attacks so often, that they've learned to be very careful. The security of the customs hall is painstaking. Tourists may well be a vital source of revenue to a frail economy, but past experience has shown that disaster can lurk in the most innocent-looking package. A particularly careful check is kept on Arabs coming across the border, for it's long been an Israeli complaint that unrest in the West Bank is often fomented by influence from neighboring Arab countries. The West Bank is occupied territory ruled by an Israeli military administration. It contains many scenes of quarrels past and present. This is Jericho, said to be the oldest town in the world, with ruins from as far back as 7000 BC. It's an important place in Jewish history because it was the first town to be taken by Joshua after crossing the River Jordan. The book of Joshua recounts how the trumpets sounded and the people shouted and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. There are other ruins at Jericho which recall more recent conflict. This used to be part of a refugee camp housing 70,000 Arabs displaced by the 1948 War of Israeli Independence. In the 1967 war, they fled again, many to join the unhappy community of Palestinian refugees in exile. In ancient times, Jericho was also known as the City of Palms because of the large areas of dates that were grown around it. Today, the fruit-producing industry thrives again after a long period of decline, and dates are once more an important commodity for barter in the marketplace. Jericho is not only the oldest town, it's also the lowest, 258 meters below sea level. The mildness of its winters have always been a great attraction for those wealthy enough to escape the cold of Jerusalem. The ancients used to say that all Palestine could not be compared to Jericho for sheer luxury. But the attraction of Jericho's barren hinterland has had little to do with luxury. It was austerity that drew men here. "15 centuries ago, the Wadi Kilt was the home of cave-dwelling hermits who attended Sunday services in a small church that later grew into the Greek Orthodox monastery of St. George of Cassiba. After a checkered history, it was rebuilt at the turn of the century and now presents the appearance of an ideal desert sanctuary. Close by, the Monastery of the Temptation clings to the side of the mountain where Jesus is supposed to have defied Satan's tempting offer to rule the world. In the Middle Ages, it was known as Mons Quaratana, signifying the 40 days Jesus fasted in the wilderness. The Latin name has been preserved by the Arabs as Quarantau. Another desert shrine, Nubi Musa, was used by the Turks for Muslim pilgrimage from Jerusalem to counterbalance the Christian celebration of Easter. According to legend, Mohammed's favorite wife is buried here. The most spectacular desert site beyond the walls of Jerusalem is also the scene of one of the most dramatic stories in this dramatic land. Physically, Massada is a great cliff looking down on the Dead Sea. Spiritually, it's one of the foremost shrines of the Jewish people. When the Romans under Flavius Silva camped here, the temple in Jerusalem had been in ruins for 2 years. All that remained of the Jewish revolt were a few hundred zealots holding out on the top of Massada. Josephus gives a graphic description in his history of the war of how the Romans built a ramp to breach the natural fortifications and how the zealots cheated their enemies of the fruits of victory. Preferring death to slavery, the Jews elected to kill themselves. The Romans were left in command of smoldering ruins and the corpses of 960 men, women, and children. Massada was developed by Herod the Great as an emergency refuge in case of revolution. Most of the remains date from his period. It was taken by the Zealots in 66 AD in one of the first actions against Roman rule. In the 1960s, the Israelis excavated the whole area in a supreme effort which involved thousands of workers over a combined period of 11 months. Today, some elite members of the Israel Defense Force take their oath of allegiance at Massada. For the lesson of the Zealots' last stand remains clear: the need for endless vigilance and determination in the cause of national freedom. In fact, the often quoted words, "Massada shall not fall again," have become linked with the whole concept of Israel's security. A message of defiance from the Zealots who refused to submit to Rome to the present defenders of the revived Jewish state.